guys, we are here with Paul the Eggman. Should I call you Paul or should I call you the Eggman? Which do you prefer?
Well, why don't we stick with Eggman?
With Eggman?
Yeah,
I like
easy.
that. It has a
It's
twist
easy.
to it. So, the Eggman is my fellow neighbor at Art 150 Studios.
Right.
We finally get to sit down. Thank you so much for being here, being part of my podcast.
Well, thanks for having me, Tarik.
Of course, my pleasure. I'm so glad we get to learn about your process and your your fascinating work that's so detailed. And I have no idea how you do it, but I'm so glad you're here today to tell us about it. So would you mind start by telling us a little about yourself?
Sure. My work is on and with eggshells because I grew up in a Ukrainian American family in the States, and I learned this traditional folk art that we in Ukrainian call pysanky, which is derived from the verb pisati, which means to write, and I'll tell you what that all means. But you might know these as the Ukrainian Easter eggs. They're kind of these fanciful, colorful, designed, beautiful things that come out this time of the year in spring is the time when people are making these. And it's a really ancient folk art that I learned since I was maybe 8, 10, and I was taught by my mother, which is kind of traditional in a Ukrainian family. And I really took to it. This was the kind of funny thing about that happened because my mother taught my other siblings, but I was the one that really kind of took to it. And I started being really good at doing the process, which is essentially batik on an eggshell. So what that means is that the process is using wax as a resist to a dyeing process. So a design gets created by what we say is writing wax on an egg, not drawing. And this is because the practice in its original form, which is maybe at least 3,000 years ago, and it's like it could be older, it's this folk magic practice is really what it is. Because what you're doing is you're taking a fertile egg, because in the practice you're supposed to be using the children of the rooster, because the rooster chased away the evil night spirits. So the rooster was considered a magical bird.
Yes.
So the children of the rooster would be magical also. So this means children of a rooster means you've got a fertile egg, right? Which means you could eat it, raise it to a chick, or you could make magic with it. And what people were doing was taking the life force and considering that powerful and ascribing how they would use that power by writing with wax on an eggshell what they wanted that power to be used for. So all of that beautiful decorative motif that you see is actually a language of symbols. And these are symbols that are a language conveying the intention for this magical process of using an egg to become what we would say in English is a talisman. And so there'd be different uses. So there'd be, protective signs. So there'd be protect the house from fire and lightning. What are the needs of a, Bronze Age period agrarian society? Healthy crops, healthy animals, healthy people, protection from fire and lightning, things like that. Love, cures from sickness. There's actually symbols to help old people go to the other side.
Oh, wow.
It's this image of ladders. It's image
wow.
of ladders on the side of an egg that's meant to be given to an old person to help them pass on.
Wow, that's so cool.
No, it's really beautiful. It's
so
really
complex,
interesting. And so there's this whole language of symbols that shows up that are then used for how the user would use them, based on what their needs were. And so that's what this was originally. And so it's really fascinating to me that this practice was preserved. And actually, we're still talking about it in this kind of post-industrial age, because one of the things that you may know is that folk culture dies with industrialization.
That's true.
Because people are moved off of the cycle of living on the land.
Yeah.
And with it goes a lot of knowledge about, and also usually in cultures with modernization, there's the loss of folk culture. But this hasn't happened in Ukraine, interestingly, because Ukraine wasn't really industrialized till the Soviet period. There had been some industrialization earlier, but my grandparents came over before World War I. And so all of this was retained, and then it's just passed on.
Well, that's amazing they kept the tradition.
Yeah, and so for instance, in Ukraine, this is the thing that, just to speak around current events, the tenacity of these people holding on to their folk culture, that I could be talking about it today and knowing what it's about. It's not only like what it is, but it's knowing what it is. It's knowing what the symbols mean for the most part. So that there's this connection, and that tenacity of holding on to that is the same kind of tenacity that these people are doing to save their country during this invasion, and how creative they are actually in their, especially the initial response, where everybody thought they were going to be run over in a minute. But they all rose up, and they were like, one of the things I saw, this is a total sidebar, but I saw this one journalist talking about when he was first there, when he was running into these people and talking to people who were prepared that the Russians were going to show up in their town, and that these guys had like rifles, like hunting rifles, but they had a stack of Molotov cocktails prepared. And he was saying, well, where did you get that? Like, well, the old grandmothers are making the Molotov cocktails.
Oh, wow.
So it's just fascinating that people all rose up together and started doing whatever self-defense meant in that moment, and they got themselves prepared.
That's amazing.
So anyway, this is a side thing, but it really, this is something that kind of also got translated to me by my mother. I could thank her for this. It was like my interest and my love of things Ukrainian, and my pride in my national heritage.
And I have a question. Did you learn all of this as a kid, or like the more you begin to work on your practice, you found out little by little, like did you learn everything as a kid?
Well, both and. I mean, there was stuff that then I would run into or find, or articles I would find later on when I was an adult, where I was already working in it. Or like, there's a book that I found that came out of Canada, which is a really great kind of, it's an ethnographic study of these designs that's laid out in this album of all these plates that show you like regional designs, like this region in Ukraine had this kind, and this or this, or even things that are in the diaspora, or things that, and then pointing out the various related symbology and putting symbols together on different pages. So it really got me to see, the extent of, at least to the extent that some of the stuff has been cataloged. And so finding out, and then kind of like just learning from, reading just articles that people had written. There had been actually supposedly some serious academic study that began happening in the late 19th century by Russian ethnographers. And I don't know their names, but there's a couple of pieces that were written, and I've never read them. I don't know if they've ever been translated. I don't know Russian. So anyway, so there's some of that has happened, but again, the thing again is the practice is still alive. And actually, this is a good moment to relate a myth that I learned about this practice that supposedly comes out of the Carpathian Mountains among what are called the Hutzel people, who are in the Carpathians, and they have this belief that the fate of the world is dependent on the making of these eggs.
Wow.
That they have this belief that there's this like monster that's chained to a cliff, and every year his like emissaries go out and count the number of pysanky that are made, and if there are a lot made, his chains are tightened and love flows. But if there aren't many made, then his chains are loosened and evil abounds. And if the practice should stop, he will be loosed on the world, and the world will be destroyed.
Oh my God! So the chain gets cut off, basically.
Right, right.
Wow, that's so interesting.
It's really interesting, like folk myths.
Such a
but
interesting background. So
it's
and complex.
It's deeply. Let's just say it's deeply rooted.
Yeah.
It's really deeply rooted. And and here was another experience I had was. My family used to get National Geographic, like most middle-class white families did in America in the 1960s and 70s, right? We all got, and in the April 1972 edition, so I'm like 11 years old at this point, already making these eggs, there's a whole full-page article in the National Geographic about these eggs.
Wow.
And it comes with this, spread of all these eggs with really intricate designs that I'd never seen, and it became my template for perfecting my craft. I still have. Well, actually, the original edition I got so messed up, and I ended up ordering from National Geographic another copy that I still have.
Oh wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, and so there's this template of these eggs that were made. They were from a collection of someone, I think, in Minnesota or something like that, where there's a lot of Ukrainians.
Yeah.
And so but these were more complex designs, and I started copying them. but to perfect my
At
own.
what age was that?
So like 11.
Oh wow.
I'm perfecting my ability to draw and do these more complex designs by looking at that. And there's still, I could show you, I'll show you in the studio at some point. I'll show you that. I can show you ones that I still have that you could see.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that's that design, that's that egg.
Oh wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, so, yeah.
I have a question. Your creative process, how do you get inspired, like, to come up with designs? Are you, like, referencing books or previous article as a kid that you saw?
Well, I'll say that, in a sense, with asking that question, you're kind of, if you're going to jump into the present, you're talking to someone who has now been professionally working for over 30 years.
Yeah.
So those inspirations have changed over time.
Yeah.
So for instance, for me, inspiration always comes from nature.
Okay.
Nature is like a primary source of inspiration and beauty, and also it's shown up in my work a lot. Often, like, for instance, the interesting thing for me is, like, as someone who draws, for instance, I usually only really like to draw landscapes that inspire me. And it almost has to be, like, at a certain, I have to be inspired to draw. It can't just be any landscape.
Yeah.
And mostly it's something that's totally out in nature and is away from anything human. This is just me.
Yeah.
So for instance, if you looked at my drawing book, I'd show you, like, dozens of landscapes.
So do you carry, like, a sketchbook around with you?
Not a lot.
No?
No, not a lot. So I'm not that type of an artist. I'm usually more thinking about stuff and doing sketches in my studio related to things. So for instance, like right now, I'm working on a show that's going to be up this summer in Provincetown that are... It's kind of funny, but they're ecstasies is what they are, and of course everybody's going to want to call them eggstasies.
Yeah,
just
a cute catch,
just as a cute catch. But I'm not gonna call them eggstasies. But anyway, but they are. I mean, the idea of the show is to use intensive patterning of imagery that is batik to describe, like, what an ecstatic moment is like.
Yeah.
So actually, in the show I have in the lobby, there's a couple of, like, pieces that I've done that have been studies for this. So, I mean, that's what I'm working on now, and sometimes the inspiration, it really kind of depends. Like a recent piece I did was related to the war in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
I did this kind of classic reproduction. I've done a lot of work that is based and relates to Attic Black, what's called Attic Black pottery. It's 5th century BC Greek pottery. And the reason I first went there for inspiration is that there was a lot of homoerotic imagery that I liked, being gay. And so as a gay artist, it was a place to, like, find actual erotic imagery to reproduce. And what it ended up doing by doing that is it actually taught me line drawing in a way to do figure drawing. Like, I'm not professionally trained as an artist.
Oh, that's amazing.
I'm totally self-taught. So I've taught myself, like, for instance, how to do figure drawing of a particular style by doing this copying of this work, of pottery design.
Yeah.
So working with the human figure in that way. So that's what led me into. But I use Greek pottery design a lot because I can reproduce the effect with a strong line that a batiked waxed line on an eggshell will do. So I can create a similar image relatively easily. Yeah. So that's why I'm going to it a lot. But I just did this image in the response to the war in Ukraine, that 3 by 3 foot piece of Ajax carrying the dead Achilles. It's probably one of the largest flat pieces I've done, and it's out of that, so that's an inspiration. So how do I respond to the war? And to me, it's like looking at this Greek pottery because there's a classic image that comes right off of pottery that's been done several times in different styles that I was able to look at, which was interesting when you start studying the imagery on the pottery and you see how different pottery artists did the painting. Yeah. Because each one of those people, probably men, were quite as accomplished, especially as Greek pottery then progresses into like red figure pottery. The detailing and the design on them become even more detailed and like fine than even black figure pottery. But so sometimes I'm referencing both. Because one of the things that I've used as a studio moniker is this idea of what I call ancient design for a new world view. And so I'm often looking at, I've looked at Greek pottery. I've also looked at a lot of like classical Chinese, Vietnamese, Japanese, Korean pottery for inspiration. And the thing about this whole ancient design for a new world view to me is about thinking about that there's a certain wisdom that was carried in the societies of those people, classical periods, and to extract some of that imagery because of almost what would be a subconscious or unconscious type of knowing that comes in the image. Like, what is like, for instance, with the Ukrainian egg design, what is being translated besides the image and the intention for that image to use, but what is the psychology that shows up in the empowerment of a person doing the process, but also in conveying whatever the strength of the image, and what does the image convey to oneself as a human, rooted in that process. Yes. And what's the wisdom there that we lose in our current worldview, where we don't, like our world. One of the things that I like to think about is, because of studying classical culture, is that we think that now, because of our technological advancement, that we have a higher standard of living or a better culture than what happened before. Yes. And I think we're foolish if we think that. Because first of all, we don't know.
Exactly.
But their worlds were more highly decorated in a way that, for instance, our world used to be, say, in the 19th century, when you just look at, for instance, architectural design and the development of architectural design, and then how modernism strips that away.
Yes.
Right? And is design not a humanizing factor in architecture? And what happens when we go sleek and modern as we do? I mean, I'm very much, I love modern architecture. It doesn't mean that I hate it, but I'm just wondering, what are we missing?
Yeah.
In the humanizing elements that happen when we're living in a world that's mostly glass and steel and marble and concrete and hard surfaces
and cold surfaces
and cold hard surfaces, right? Yeah. With cold hard colors. What does that do to us temperamentally and emotionally, and also sociologically? You know what I mean? Like, what is the so that's
creatively too.
Yeah. So so in any event, so I just think there's a lot of value that shows up in these ancient designs, and I'm just trying to bring them forward as a way of like looking at, how does this relate to, also our contemporary concerns and our contemporary aesthetics as well at the same time. So that's the reason for that moniker and what I've been thinking about it, as I've been working over the years. It's always there's this, it always becomes for me that kind of touchstone of like why I'm choosing certain things versus others. Like, so for instance, here's a story of an inspiration, as it were. One of my best friends died a couple of years ago of cancer. It was really rough. He was really like the person that I would hang out with all the time.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And so when we did art together, because he was a filmmaker and I was in a number of his films, etc.
Wow,
so
that's so cool.
Yeah, so I mean, really close relationship. So, sometime in the year before he died, friends of mine came up from Florida with a box of cassowary shells from a cassowary farm.
Oh, wow.
Right?
Yeah.
In Florida, right? Cassowaries are this really crazy bird that come out of Australia and Papua New Guinea, but have this amazing shell, but these were broken shells. And so, I decided, I didn't know what I was going to do with those shells. They were just in my studio for a while. I didn't know what to do with them. And, I was going to do something. Well, anyway, so it just came to me after he died that I wanted to do some kind of piece that was kind of an ode to him, a piece of remembrance. And so what I decided to do was, I realized that I would use those cassowary shells to do the piece because they are so rare and unique. And this friend of mine was so rare and unique. You know what I mean? So to me, it was the perfect use of those shells. But what I did as a way to commemorate his loss was to reproduce a funerary scene that you see in what's called Athenian geometric pottery, which is those big pots you see in the Met Museum. They're like 7th century.
Okay.
You see this big, and there's always a scene of a guy on a bier and all these people mourning and everything. Yeah, it was like an image like that of him, like he was laying on his bed, dead, and all of us around him mourning. But the thing that I was able to work into the image, I mean, a friend of mine ended up buying the piece from me, but I was able to. He lived in this amazing apartment on the 17th floor that in the West Village, right at the corner of 6th Avenue and Waverly. So he was in the old Waverly building. Yeah. So he's on the northwest corner on the 17th floor, just under the penthouse. And so he has this view of the city that is unparalleled. Yeah. I mean, I could show you images from his phone, but just breathtaking. Because the city kind of rises up from there. Yeah. And he's looking almost directly at the Empire State Building from his bed. You know what I mean? So this image. So I was able to work the city, the landscape, through the window image in the piece. You know what I mean? As a way of then commemorating him.
That's beautiful.
And doing this piece. I showed it a year ago, in a couple. The show that was in January of a year ago. Okay. In the gallery at 150, and then it turns out this Barb, his best friend, bought it from me. Yeah. So
if you have pictures, I'd love to share this.
Instagram
account, because that's beautiful.
Yeah, no, I could show. I could show you. Yeah, I could show you that. Yeah. So it was. Yeah. So and so what that ended up doing is then inspiring the whole show I did last summer. Wow. Where I was working. I did some work with cassowary, but mostly then it was with emu shells. Oh. So the inspiration here then becomes translating the process of using wax as a resist to etch the shells, because within this process, these shells have a very dark surface like emu shells, but they get lighter in tone the deeper you go in. So I'm exposing those colors by drawing wax on the shell and then putting it into an acid bath to etch the shell. The acid I'm using is vinegar, so it's a slow process. Yeah. But what I'm doing is capturing the different tones of color as it gets lighter and lighter as it moves in. And the shells are already attached to wood. So then that becomes the process for creating, like challenging myself to create landscapes, etc., using this process. So that was what that show was. But it was interesting that the initial inspiration was to do this piece as a memorial to my friend Charlie, who had died. So inspiration comes in many forms, in many places.
That's amazing.
So it's, I mean, there are experiences that, like for instance, again, the show this summer is going to be based on personal experiences of what I've experienced as ecstasies. Oh, wow. There are, different images. And then the challenge for me is to then try to convey the experience, obviously, through the artwork. Yes. In what I'm doing. So that's.
I wanted to go back to the previous show you have right now at R150 in the lobby. First of all, congratulations.
Well, thank you.
This episode will be published, I think, before this week, so people can check it out. How long is the show going for?
It's going to be up through March.
Through March, okay.
Right.
And I haven't been able to go there because I've been busy with the podcast, but I definitely will make it prior to the end of this week. But I did see some pictures of the show, and it looks amazing. And I saw there's a tree branch. There's like some sort of branch, but like the person that shared it on Instagram, I couldn't really see the whole body. Right. I saw like a little piece. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. What is that? Like you glued the eggshells to the branch?
Yes. So this is a whole other process that I'm working with, where I'm eggshell encrusting surfaces or objects. I've created sculpture that way with found wood, but what I have greater aspirations, but this is kind of a test run just so people can see.
Yeah.
But what I did was I found like a 12-foot long oak branch walking to the studio
Yeah.
one day, and I brought it to the studio, and I had it in there for a long time, and I haven't worked. It's been in the studio for a few months, but I decided, well, since I was going to do the lobby show, I would do this piece that and I have this interesting, like, there's a running design up the branch that is brown shell that is dyed blue, and then you'll see two different tones of blue, and the difference is the inner or the outer of the shell. So one of the things that's fun to work with is the convexity or the concavity of the shell, and the difference of how the inside of a shell or the outside of a shell takes dye. Because oftentimes the inside takes dye more strongly than the exterior does.
Oh wow, that's so cool.
Yeah, no, so it's an interesting thing that you learn along the way.
Yeah.
And so, some of my pieces, I'm laying down shell in that way in order to expose either the inside or the outside of the shell, depending on what I'm doing or why.
I've seen your work before, and I always thought it was only exterior, never the interior.
No.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So, for instance, I have this American flag up there that I did recently, right? And of course, the American flag is meant to be showing that it's like crumbling. And hopefully the janitor doesn't like sweep up the eggshells on the floor.
Happen?
It's happened before.
Anyway. You need like one of those museum.
I do.
I
Yeah.
I should have.
And last night I should have put a sign down there. Anyway, but on that flag you'll see the red stripes are brown shells, and there is a kind of X running through it that's darker red than the other. And
it's all good. We just have 3 cameras in the studio, and they keep recording, so don't worry.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Anyway, so you'll see the difference between the inside and the outside of a brown shell dyed red when you look at the flag.
Yeah.
You can see that difference.
Oh, wow.
But, that difference also shows up because a lot of times with my pieces, I'm heavily sanding them when I'm done, or, it kind of depends, but the way the sandpaper hits the shell, whether it's the convex or the concave side, will give you a different effect. In terms of
fascinating.
So there's this whole there's this whole material physicality phenomenon with the eggshell and like the crustiness of the surface that I can produce that are really fun to work with. Now, of course, it's a challenge because, but I'm also working with a really strong epoxy that I use to put the eggshell to whatever surface it's attached to.
Oh, and then you like seal it?
I seal it after usually, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Now, but I have to say, these emu shell pieces we were just talking about, I never seal.
Okay.
So those are, but again, I'm trusting on the epoxy.
Yeah.
Again, that also brings us to just, a technical thing that I have to deal with is that I have to peel that inner lining of a shell in order to have the shell stick to the epoxy, not the lining. Inner, it's essentially the placenta of the egg.
Yeah.
That has to get peeled away. If I'm exposing the back part, the outside.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes I leave again that on because that actually takes dye really deeply.
Oh, it does?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It's really, it's like, becomes like paper.
And do you have to sand the shell to add extra color? Like the more you sand, the extra color it attaches to it?
No, not necessarily. I'm usually sanding after the processes are done in order to reveal some white of the shell.
Cool.
Yeah.
And this is like something you learn as you were like.
Oh, these are something I've learned over the years of working in my own studio, like all these various processes around, like how to handle the shell and like the lacquering process that I'm using. And the thing about the lobby show that I just want to point out to you that was really fun is that there is something about the light in that lobby. It's just like, it's got to be like LED fluorescent lighting, whatever. But there's something about my surfaces that the way the light is bouncing off those surfaces are causing the colors to pop in a way that I've never even seen before, in a way that's even better than in galleries I've been in, when I've had spot-lit pieces.
That's amazing.
And I don't know exactly why it
like
is.
A standard lighting. That's like a
I know.
lighting, right?
And, right. No, I know. And I think it has something. I think it's especially true at night. And I think it's especially true because the light's also bouncing against those glass walls.
And probably reflects back
in.
Yeah.
And because it's reflecting back in, like shining maybe right at the piece, and because, again, these are surfaces that had been lacquered, but then, they've been buffed so that they're matte, usually. I'm not sure if there's still enough reflex, you know, just the light popping on. It's really amazing. I'm very pleased. I'll just put it that way. I'm really happy the way the show looks.
Yeah.
And partially has to do with this optics effect that I hadn't anticipated.
Wow. And does the natural light, like the sunrise or sunset, does it affect and like kind of transform the work?
Well, I don't know that. I can't say I've been there at sunrise.
Oh, okay. Have you been there at sunset?
Yeah, but you know, the weather lately has not been that
cloudy,
well
right?
lit. It's been kind of cloudy a lot.
Okay.
So, and again, mostly I'm around there in the evening, so I'm mostly experiencing
Like
this
missing
thing at
out,
night.
But if I'm
I
there,
really
make sure to photograph it for our Instagram account.
Oh, okay, yeah,
That's so cool.
yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, so it's just a fun side phenomenon.
Yeah.
That's all that.
It's amazing. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you something. With our previous guest, they talked about how getting a studio space transformed their work, and they went from like the standard practice to like being able to experiment with their medium. Do you think like having like a separate workspace has helped your work in a bit?
Oh, it's been amazing.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh my God, it's been quite honestly transformative. Yeah, and really transformative in the sense of also my sense of self as an artist got transformed. I'd always been working on Eggshells, so I always thought, I didn't need much art space, and I would always carve out like what I would call studio space or a studio room in an apartment where I lived.
Yeah. Like the kitchen table, that's what I used to use before.
Yeah, I mean, at some point it would be the
Yeah.
kitchen table, but then it would move, and depending on where I was or what was possible, you know. So I never realized how having that independent other space would transform my sense of just being an artist. It was really amazing. It was, and not only that, but then, you know, it's really helped my process along, especially when I'm doing a series of things, because I could do a whole series in a way that I could never do before.
Yeah.
And this, you know, really has an influence, for instance, when one's dyeing shells to do a series of pieces, dye over time gets weaker. And so the color won't be as strong. And so if I can't either control that or I have to like create new dye or whatever like that, doing a whole bunch of eggshells dyed at one time allows me to control all of that. So then I have the eggshells already dyed for the piece. Like for instance, you know, that piece that we were talking about, this Ajax carrying the dead Achilles piece, you know, it's on a 3-foot square board that has like a 4-inch, is a 2x4 running around as a frame. So that gets covered because I always do the sides of my pieces as they're usually boards that are floating off the wall. So I don't frame my pieces. So there's always the edge that I'm also covering with eggshell. But that 36, you know, one of the things I figured out, this is kind of a funny side thing, is that a jumbo egg will generally cover a 4-inch square space.
Oh, wow. So you're basically using all of the egg for like 4-inch one egg, right?
Right. It will give you 4-inch square
Yeah.
space. We'll cover 4. So when you're thinking about 36 inches by 36
gosh.
inches,
Yeah.
right? That's a lot of eggs,
Yeah.
right? So it was like dozens of shells that had been dyed before I even put them onto that board.
Wow.
And they were all set to go of different tonal colors of orange. That is how I was, you know, how I usually work.
Oh, wow.
You know, now because I have the studio where I could do that.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah. So it's
So is there like a lot of planning that goes into your work? Because like from the perspective as somebody that like is not familiar, like when I first seen your work, I thought it's like a very spontaneous process. Like you break the shells, you glue the shell, and you paint on top of it. But here you're talking about, you know, the ink. You make everything from scratch, and then you have to like pre-plan to like dye which parts to later be used.
You know, it's interesting because I would say as my practice has grown and maybe you could say matured, there has become much more planning than I had before, because I'm now, it's only kind of happened really since about 2013, maybe 10 years ago. They started thinking systematically in a series. Before that, most of my work had been more idiosyncratic, where I was doing what I call collages or assemblages with shells that were already broken.
Mm-hmm.
And so by that, there are pieces from that period, and I still do that now, where they look kind of whimsical, where they're just like a lot of eggshells of different designs, just kind of like, I call them my crazy collages, where they're kind of assembled onto a board with no inherent narrative desire or design in mind. It's just like what's available and we're going to do it. And sometimes it's more of like a color compositional phenomenon rather than anything what I'm just, and depending on whatever's on the eggs that are already designed that are then being broken apart and reassembled into something else. So I still do that. Mostly I'm doing that on those what I'm calling micro collages, where I'm doing these little projects on these postcard sized pieces of cardstock, where I'm doing that more, where I used to do that on larger pieces in the past. So now, because now I'm really thinking through like pieces, and so therefore you're going to get this whole pre-planning of like, okay, what's it going to take? So for instance, as I'm getting ready for the show for this August, I've already made a couple of studies and kind of figuring out like, how do I want to approach this for these different pieces? And of course, every piece is going to be somewhat different. But so for instance, I've discovered in the second piece of the study that, I want to use duck shell for the sky motif in the piece, because duck shell will give me a specific look, because the duck shell is really smooth. So it'll give me almost kind of like, you could make it almost look like somewhat translucent in a way. It's going to be against boards, so you're not going to literally see through it, but just a duck shell, because of its smoothness, when it's batiked, the way the colors show up against each other is different than even a chicken or goose egg if you did the same technique. So that's one of the things, so by doing the studies, I've figured out, a duck shell would work better here.
How many, I don't know if it's like, let's say species or animals, but how many animals' eggs did you get to like experiment on and use for your art?
Well, I've only worked with bird eggs. Some people have asked me if I ever worked on like lizard or crocodile or alligator eggs. And I don't know whether or not those. I don't know how you would get those. These other big bird eggs are available just because they're being farmed in this country. And that's how you get these shells, because they're like excess shells that they don't need them. So so pretty much I worked on most. That's interesting. Chicken, duck, turkey.
Oh wow.
Goose, swan, emu, cassowary, ostrich.
Oh wow. And ostrich eggs are like pretty big, right?
Yeah, they're relatively the largest bird.
Yeah.
The largest egg. Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
And another question, regards to chicken eggs. Do you eat every chicken egg that you use for your art, or?
No, no, because if I'm having to dye the egg before it's broken apart, if I'm just using shells, I'm recycling shells out of my kitchen.
Okay.
So I'm just saving those and using those. But if I'm having to design an egg that then gets used, either it's broken apart or kept whole, whatever, what happens is actually the dye gets through the shell, so that the egg, you can't really eat. I wouldn't eat the egg. I wouldn't eat that egg because it's got dye in it. You know what I mean? And you can sometimes see when you do clean out the egg afterwards that the white is colored. Like blue or red, or you know what I mean? You can see color, the dye coming through. Because the funny thing about shells is that they are permeable. Because every shell has the opportunity that, I guess, oxygen can get through. There are these tiny microscopic holes. You actually see those holes as dots in an ostrich egg. If you look at an ostrich egg, there are these tiny dots you see all through the egg.
Oh, and that's what it is.
And that's what it is. It's these air holes. Like, it's just the brilliant design of a shell, what a shell is. They are. It's really amazing technology.
That's amazing.
When you think
about it. I wanted
it.
to circle back to that piece, the oak tree piece in the lobby show. Because when I saw that, I was so intrigued about the work, but I also thought, oh my God, this will look so cool as like a public, large sculpture.
Oh, well, thank you.
So
thank you.
That's like, oh my gosh, if this was like bigger, it could be like interactive. Did you ever think about something?
Oh no, I'd love to do that. No, that's the aspiration. That's kind of a study to show people what's possible. But no, in fact, I've been making some inquiries in the city about doing this. But yeah, no, I've already done a tree. Well, I've done a couple of these projects already.
Okay.
Like a friend of mine, I go to Provincetown a lot, and a friend of mine who hosts me there, we found on the beach I don't know, I think it was a 13-foot long piece. It was a cedar trunk. I think it was a cedar tree, but it was the trunk that was found on the beach as driftwood.
Oh, wow.
And we carried it home, got it home from the beach, obviously with someone's car.
How big was it?
It was like 13 feet long.
Oh, my gosh.
It was just like, it's this long, slender. Well, anyway, I ended up, eggshell encrusting it and kind of made it into a flagpole that he has up on his house. I mean,
oh, it's still there?
It's still there. Yeah.
Oh,
no,
wow.
This happened like 3 now, maybe 4 years ago is when I made it, and it's still there. And they put it away in the winter, but they take it out. I did lacquer it, so it's covered.
Yeah.
But I did do another tree where I'm living on the back of our yard, which was like a 2-story tall fir tree that I didn't do any covering on it at all. And so over time, the thing is kind of a great experiment because the epoxy's holding the shell there of the shell that's on there. And the weird thing is that the brown and the white eggshell is all kind of muted to this off tan color. Like the brown shell is no longer brown.
Oh, wow.
Like I had done these designs
So
with brown
changed,
and white
yeah.
shell, but the brown kind of faded.
Oh, wow.
And
Is
so
it just sunlight or just weather?
I think it's sunlight or weather or maybe both. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny. But, I really have this idea of creating like what I'd call tree totems. Where, I've noticed, for instance, there's a couple of these tree trunks in the area where I live. A tree had died and the city came through and basically lopped off all of the trunks and just left, like there's one at First in Manila.
Yeah.
Near the studio. And it was an oak tree, and so it's like 2 stories tall. And I would love to cover it in eggshell and do some kind of like a design on it. It can be kind of anything, but one of the things I realized with the tree trunk is you've got those big ovoids that show up where the branches had been. And so they become a de facto kind of already egg-shaped phenomenon. When you think about it, you know what I mean? But I was thinking about that one, but I thought that would be great if those became big eyes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That looks so cool.
You know what I mean? So, but I really have this, because I pitched this proposal to Socrates Sculpture Park a couple of years ago, and they didn't take it. But I'm really interested in doing something like this, where I do these tree totem phenomenon, where they become a piece of public art, and maybe in a place where people wouldn't expect.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
Yeah, so it's. We'll see. This is something I do want to start working on.
When I saw the oak tree that you did for your current solo show, the first thing that reminded me was Kusama's trees at the botanical garden that they did.
Oh.
They did like 6 of them with her work, like wrapped with the dots.
Oh,
and
really?
When I seen that, I said, "Oh my gosh, this!" But like a thicker trunk, centered in the middle of a park where people can like maybe touch if it's allowed, or take pictures, or if there's like a hole in the tree can walk through. I thought it would be, so whoever's listening, if you can please reach out to the Eggman and make it happen, this would be so cool.
It would be amazing. No, it would be amazing. And it's not an expensive thing to do either. I mean, eggshells are not that expensive.
Yeah.
It's mostly time. But the thing that also was amazing to me, again, here's a phenomenon that I'll share as being an artist. Sometimes my artwork presages something that happens in my life. Mm-hmm. Or I do a piece of art and I realize an understanding about myself that I didn't have until I look at this piece of art.
Yeah.
And one of the things, along this line was that I was working on this tree. I don't know, maybe it was in 2018, was it? I think it was in the end of summer of 2018. In that fall, I went to Australia, and there I'm looking at Aboriginal art in these major museums there, and I'm seeing these absolutely amazing tree-carved, Aboriginal pieces that are in almost the same color story as eggshell, white and brown eggshell, and I was just like flabbergasted, and it was like such an inspiration, especially like in the beautiful carvings that these folks had done. And they were on, again, they weren't 2 stories tall, but they were like really long, these long, pieces that were probably, those were probably 10, 12, 14 feet high, these things that I saw in this piece. But I thought, oh my God, there it is. It was fascinating to me that I didn't know that they did that kind of work I mean, I always knew about the sand painting, etc.,
Yeah.
but I didn't know about this, and I knew about painting on tree bark, but I didn't know this phenomenon of like
Wow.
carving, these images on trees
Yeah.
that were done. It was really,
Oh, I didn't know that either.
yeah.
That's
So
really
that was really amazing to see. So again, there's just, I don't know, this thing we tap into when these ideas come up, and then there they are somewhere else,
Yeah.
out of totally different context,
Wow.
And
I saw a picture on your Instagram that I think this might have been a few years ago where you were one of the artists that did the eggs outside of the Columbus Circle.
Right.
That's
Yeah, I
really
participated
cool.
in what was called the Big Egg Hunt.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a London NGO that was for Asian elephants. I think specifically an NGO to support Asian elephants. And they had done this in London. They brought it to New York, and the artists, we had to submit a design, and you were given it was about 3 foot tall, kind of plastic egg form that was attached to a stand that then would get attached to a plinth when it was being shown publicly. But it was this big project that it was a fundraiser through an auction, an online public auction. So and so I did an eggshell encrusted the egg,
Yeah.
and I did the globe.
Yeah.
This
saw,
globe.
yeah.
And again, within that process, I was working again with convexity and concavity. So all the land area in that piece was brown shell, the exterior of brown shell,
Oh, wow.
except in the Arctic areas
Yes.
or Antarctic areas.
Mhm.
And then the water, all the oceans were the inside of shell.
Oh, wow.
So I was playing off the convexity and the concavity of the shell between land and water.
Yeah.
And then what I would do is I take the dye I use and work it as a watercolor medium to do the topographical painting, to give you a topographical globe. Because also, for instance, all of here's just another thing about, to me, like, the earth is our mother, okay?
I agree.
I come out of a religion because I come out of, like, the Orthodox tradition, though we were, Ukrainian Catholics, part of the church that had reestablished ties with Rome, but, so I come out of the same kind of church that Andy Warhol comes out of,
Oh, wow.
right? So, if you know what Byzantine iconography looks like, you can understand his portraiture and the crazy colors he uses that seem off-tone,
Yeah.
right?
You're talking about Warhol, like the screen prints?
Yeah, all the screen prints,
Yeah,
all those
yeah, I know
portraits,
what you
the
mean.
celebrity portraits,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
They're icons
Yeah.
because he comes out of a tradition of icons.
Absolutely.
I come out of a tradition of icons.
Yeah.
So to me, the earth is the ultimate mother. So my eggs that I do of the topographical globe are icons of the earth. And whenever I do images of the earth, it's always in topographical imagery, never as a political landscape. Because I don't, you know what I mean? And so it's all, and in fact, I did a sculptural piece where I took a school globe and I ripped the paper off, kept it, and then resurfaced the form of the globe with eggshell and did a topographical globe.
Wow.
And showed it with the torn paper map below it.
Well, that's
As
so
though
cool.
the earth had shed its map and itself came through.
Wow.
And it's a friend of mine who's a collector
Yeah.
has this
I love
piece.
this. And do you have all the images of like the works we're talking about on your Instagram?
Yes. Now that for this particular globe one, was from several years ago, and so whether or not I have something on Instagram on that one, not sure. I don't know about that.
Because
particular
I
piece.
don't think I've seen that. It sounds really cool.
Yeah,
Really amazing.
yeah. I somewhere in my past I do have images of it, or I'll have to ask him to do it. But yeah, so but there is that, and I've thought of like redoing that again.
Yeah.
That image.
Oh my god, that would be amazing.
And
I can't even fathom the answer to this. But how many eggs do you need for like a sculpture like that?
Well, depends on the size of the
Yeah.
it's the size of the piece, and you have to, if we want to do this calculation of a jumbo egg covers
That's amazing,
4 square
yeah.
inches, then
Yeah.
you have to just do the math.
Oh my gosh. I'm horrible on that. Yeah. But that's like to me the fascination of your work. Because when I first seen it was right when I got to Art 150 and I did curated that show in the large gallery. And I remember seeing your work and then seeing people interact with your work on the opening night and like hearing the questions they were asking like each other that were there. It was like, to me, it was like the texture, the color, how the light, vibrates off of it. And then I remember also like people's reaction to like, oh my gosh, like this is eggshell, is this not eggshell? And then I remember when I first seen it, I thought it was like a very thin layer of clay, like I couldn't figure out, or glass that were all glued together and then cracked.
Oh,
and then
I
like
see.
reading like your artist statement said, oh my gosh, this is, and then like you have this whole experience, like, oh my gosh, it's eggshell, how many eggshell? This is so cool, like how did you get the idea? And like the more you dive in, the more fascinating it is, you know what I mean?
Well, thanks.
So,
Thanks.
I still remember, it was like that greenish, probably like 12 by 12 piece, like right at the entrance to the left. But I remember like, to me, like your work, there's so much.
Oh, right. It was probably one of those etched emu
Yeah,
shell pieces.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was from that series because I think I was working on them then.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's really cool. But yeah, like seeing people, having my experience with it and like having all these questions and seeing the next person walk down to it and like have that same experience, but like from a different perspective, asking different questions. Like you need an artist talk at your next show, please. Because
Well, I'm wondering whether or not I might want to organize one for the lobby show when I come back. This is one thing I was just thinking about
you
today.
should.
Yeah, maybe I should.
That's really
Just
cool,
to just
yeah.
like go through and just I could just talk about process or talk
Yeah,
about other
because
things.
it's endless. It's
Oh,
like,
I know it can go on and on.
Yeah.
It's true.
No, but in a good way. Like it's so fascinating. Like every piece. And I also saw as well. There was a piece that was like curved on the wall.
Right. Oh, right.
That was really cool because I'll make sure to include a picture.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting thing. And again, that was
Yeah.
just, a lot of what, I used to do mostly, but I'm still doing is that because I was recycling eggs that were in my studio, I would only use wood that was recycled.
Oh.
So I wasn't buying new wood.
Yeah.
And so that was a street find.
Oh wow.
When I was living in the Gowanus at the time, and I found it up on Park Slope, literally on the corner of like Fifth Avenue and Union Street. One day I was shopping for food, and all of a sudden it was on the street, and I was like, "Wow, this is fascinating."
Oh my gosh.
And so I had no idea what it was for, what it had been used for. It was just left out. Someone was right by the trash can, so I know it was being discarded. You know what I mean? So I just picked it up and did this again. That's one of those crazy collage pieces that I talk about, where the inside has all of these different designs within it.
Oh, wow.
Different things that are kind of thrown together of what I had available.
And are you able to use like any surface, any material with the eggs, or because like how it attaches itself, or?
Well, it obviously has to be something that the epoxy will attach
okay.
to. That's it's really that. Working with the epoxy I work with. So, but the epoxy I work with though is, it's a paste when it is, so it's it can go onto any surface really. Anything that's durable.
Yeah.
That's all. So yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to ask you, do you have like any artists that you look up to that you get inspired by?
Oh yeah, there's a ton. It's interesting, as you said, that my first answer is Paul Klee.
Yeah.
Oh, totally. Oh my God, he's one of my favorites. Yeah, there's certain other artists who were. Yeah, Paul Klee. There's a series of even contemporary artists whose work I really like. Here's what is his name? Jeez Louise. I have to move on. I'm thinking about. There's this amazing English Indian artist who does these crazy large pieces that Deitch was showing.
Anish Kapoor?
No.
Jeffrey?
No, I'm gonna have to look. Rakib Shaw.
Oh, I have to check it out.
Yeah, look him up. It's
Yeah.
interesting. He's got an English last name, Rakib Shaw. His process is actually cloisonné, which is crazy.
Wow.
So the imagery is created by how cloisonné is done with metal, tin metal, and then instead of inlaying gems, which he does do sometimes, he's pouring car paint and creating these absolutely intensive, the color that he works with. Look up Rakib Shaw. like the Garden of Earthly Delights, and it's also highly eroticized, crazy imagery. Beautiful though.
Oh wow.
Absolutely beautiful.
If it's who I think it is, I think I saw his work at the Armor Show at the Javits Center last year.
You might
And it's
have.
kind of similar like to Frank Stella a little bit, no? Or maybe I have the wrong person, but if it's who I think it is, it's amazing.
Well, it is amazing, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure if we're
I have to check
Yeah,
the notes. I may not be right.
Yeah, so so those are, I mean, too often, for some reason, because I'm about to go to Spain, I'm thinking about, Picasso. And of course, I, love Picasso, but one of the things, for instance, that affected me most strongly once was when I was years ago in Madrid at the Reina Sofia is where the Guernica is, and to see the first drawing
Yeah.
of Guernica, his first
Oh, wow.
impulse to do it to me was like looking at the Holy Grail.
Oh my
Because to
gosh.
me, there's something exciting about those first drawings. Because you can see like the impulse, the ideas, the quick.
The ambition too. of the
Well, it's
fact that-
right, but it's also like the quick lines. You
Yeah.
can see the energy, the impulse,
Yeah.
the emotion going on, but the energy of the line, and just like, and you can see also that, the very first impulse is not what ends up being the final piece,
Yeah.
and it goes through a couple of changes. So that to me was really, there was something about that really sticks with me to today. You know what I mean?
I've been there 3 times, and it gets better and better.
Yeah.
And it's crazy that it's like
Yeah.
so much more to go.
Oh yeah, and what an amazing museum!
I
Oh my
know.
God! And I know. So for instance, I love Calder, I love Miro. Oh God, I could go on and on. One painter who's a who's alive today, Paul Ressica, is an amazing. He shows in New York in Provincetown, an amazing painter. People like Hoffman. I mean, it can go on and on and on. I mean,
And I have a question since you're talking about Provincetown. With your upcoming show, do you mind sharing us like the gallery and the info so people like listening now can, do a little reservation in their calendar and make sure to attend it?
Sure. I mean, it's going to be at the William Scott Gallery in Provincetown at the end of August, and I unfortunately don't know the exact date. I know it would be probably it's the second or third Friday of the month.
Okay.
It would open.
Well,
I know it's the Friday of Carnival Week.
Carnival. Okay.
It's the Friday of
plug
Carnival Week.
in your Instagram so people can start following now and keep up with it. So they'll know like the exact day.
Yeah,
and
the exact
invite.
day we'll have to look at. Yeah.
What's your Instagram?
It's my given name, so it's Paul underscore Wirhun.
And how do you spell that?
WIRHUN.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. And do you have a website too you want to share with us?
Yeah, same paulwirhun.com, same
Wirhun.
name.
And are you open to like commissions or?
Oh, sure.
Like that?
Yeah, I'm open to commissions. It depends. It really depends. Yeah.
Perfect.
Now, mind you, I'm also interested in doing like full-scale interiors.
Oh wow.
Like for instance, if you look at my show, you'll see these like squid swimming around underwater in these different
Yeah.
panels of like really intense blues and greens. I mean, I just thought it would be amazing to do a whole bathroom
Yeah. As you were talking, I was thinking like
of
maybe
walls,
like.
different sea
Yeah.
fish, so the whole walls inside are all just like you're in an undersea
Oh
world
my
or
gosh, that
whatever.
would be so cool.
Yeah, that
Or
would
like
be
a
fun.
big like functional sculpture that you can use it as sculpture, but it's like well, that would be amazing.
All kinds of ideas.
Oh wow, that's really cool. Whoever's listening, please. reach out.
That's right. So
need this in our
how about
lives.
we're imagining an eggshell encrusted world.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And people like I'm sure when they first see it, they're thinking like, oh my gosh, where did you get this tab? Is it imported from where? And whoever the homeowner is, we'd be like, oh, this is actually. They're like, no way. You know what I mean? That's what I'm
Right.
saying. Like,
No,
Your
it
work
is a
really
fun thing.
takes
It
you-
is fun.
oh my
I mean,
gosh.
the one last thing I'll say, I don't know if we're winding down, but one thing about the whole eggshell phenomenon and the use in terms of, just looking at contemporary life is that
Yeah.
everything in my pieces is already broken.
Okay.
So there's a phenomenon going on when you look at my pieces that it's a crackled surface. But in certain pieces, I mean, especially when you get larger shells, like the emu shells, like you could really see the cracks, because they're bigger
Yeah.
shells. But the cracks are, look more pronounced. So, but the thing that I guess I'm trying to convey is that, you know, our world, you know, we're at a moment where we're kind of feeling our world is falling apart.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a sense already that the world's already fallen apart. And so
Yeah.
I'm reconstructing a world after it's fallen apart.
Oh, that's amazing.
You know, and that also in a weird way, again, when I talk about like how my art presages my life or like is a you know reflection of my life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there are times in my life where I felt like my world fell apart.
Oh, wow.
You know, and so having to like reconstruct
Yeah.
my life after it kind of really fell apart, or you know, for all kinds of reasons that I want to go into my whole biography to let you know why.
Yeah.
But just having that sense, my world fell apart and having to reconstruct it.
That's beautiful.
You know, many of us have that experience in
Yeah.
our lives. You know, and so I just, you know, you know, it's kind of, you know. You know, tripping toward the future, as it
Yeah.
were, or you know, trying to grapple with the possibility of the future, you know,
Yeah.
within that reality, you
That's
know.
amazing.
So, yeah, and that's the other thing that's just kind of fascinating in terms of then how that reflects in the pieces where, you know, there are pre-done eggs because, you know, cutting back to what we were originally talking about, this cultic use of eggs implies a meaning that the egg is not just an object, but it's a subject,
Mhm.
because it's not just a thing, but it's a happening.
Yes.
Like an egg happened,
Yeah.
you know, it just didn't like appear,
Out
it
of nowhere,
happened,
yeah.
you know what I mean? And it happened for a reason, you know what I mean? And if it was fertile, it happened for another reason, you know, in that regard. And so there's like meaning imbued and it's just reality. And so when I think about then, you know, I'm working on something that is kind of in a sense of it's more of a subject than an object, then the product of my handiwork is a phenomenon and a function and a world unto itself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and in the again that original cultic belief, you know, that I'm coming out of had these eggs being kind of like the cosmos itself is in an egg.
Yeah.
Like the whole world is in an egg, and this stretches into, you know, esoteric beliefs,
Yeah.
where the micro is the macro and the macro is in the micro, right? So the egg becomes the representation of all of reality,
Yeah.
in the sense that all of reality comes out of an egg. If there's that, you know, that ancient, you know, there are these
Mhm.
really ancient beliefs that the world kind of comes out of a
Yeah,
hatched
yeah.
egg kind of thing, right? So then, you know, so that's a world unto itself, and if this world gets broken, and then, you know, applied next to another world that was broken
Yeah.
on a piece of board that I'm putting together, then I'm assembling worlds that had been and putting them together in a different new way. So again, it's this notion, again, it draws back to it's not necessarily ancient design, but it's for a new world view. So we're breaking apart the world to reimagine the
Yeah.
possibility of what it would look like reconstructed.
Yeah.
So that's, again, some of what I'm bringing through when I'm looking at my pieces based on this background that I come out of. You know, and also then like thinking about that background and its, you know, its original intent and meaning and how it still informs my thinking now. So that's the thing that, you know, to me becomes then interesting
Mm-hmm.
in that regard, in terms of how my, you know, how the visual speaks to us, to the it's almost like how the visual speaks to the unconscious self, you know, in ways that we don't necessarily apprehend.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure it's true with your art as well, is that, you know, you may look at something and have a whole understanding and meaning and experience, knowing what it took to create this piece, and then someone else walks up to it and has a whole different
Yeah.
world, a
Yeah.
whole other phenomenon happens
Yeah.
that you cannot have even
Yeah.
had an idea about.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the amazing thing about art, obviously.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know?
Different perspectives, yeah.
Yeah, you know, so.
Yeah. I'm excited. After your show in August, I definitely want to have you back. and
Okay.
hear about how that went, and also a little bit more, as you were mentioning, like, you know, how life has affected your work and how you went through some tough times and that, you know, transformed your work into different pieces. So I'd love to have you back and hear more about that. It's been
Sure.
amazing. It's been so good to have you here. Thank you so much for being with us. Just to double check again for everybody listening, Instagram, Paul, spell the last name for us because it's a little complicated.
That's right. Wirhun.
And the same thing for the website, just put a .com in the end, right?
Right, exactly.
Perfect. All right,
Exactly.
thank you so much for being here, Paul the Eggman.
Well,
It's
thanks,
been a
Tarik.
pleasure.
Well, thank you for having
Until
me.
we meet again
Yes.
later in August this year, right?
Yes, sir.